Hare Krishna. Welcome back to our Bhagavad Gita online reading lab session. So here in this today's session, we will learn the last section of the chapter 2, that is your verse number 54 to verse number 72. So basically in this section of Bhagavad Gita, so basically Arjuna asks about the questions about who is Sthita Prajna, or what are the qualities of a liberated soul, what are the symptoms of a Sthita Prajna. So those things we will learn in this particular section. So without any delay, let's go back to our Veda base. We will start from the verse number 54 of chapter 2. So as usual, we will not read those slokas and synonyms, word meaning. Rather, we will start with the translation and purport. So verse number 54 of chapter 2. Translation. Arjuna said, O Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak? And what is his language? How does he sit? And how does he walk? Purport. Is there are symptoms for each and every man in terms of his particular situation. Similarly, one who is Krishna conscious has his particular nature, talking, walking, thinking, feeling, etc. As a rich man has his symptoms by which he is known as a rich man. As a diseased man has his symptoms by which he is known as a diseased, or as a learned man has his symptoms. So a man in transcendental consciousness or of Krishna has specific symptoms in various dealings. One can know the specific symptoms from the Bhagavad Gita. Most important is how the man in Krishna consciousness speaks. For speech is the most important quality of any man. It is said that a fool is undiscovered as long as he doesn't speak. And certainly, a well dressed fool cannot be identified unless he speaks. But as soon as he speaks, he reveals himself at once. The immediate symptom of a Krishna conscious man is that he speaks only of Krishna and of matters relating to him. Other symptoms then automatically follow as stated below. So we will go to the next verse, chapter number 2, verse number 55. Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind, thus purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. Purport. The Bhagavatam affirms that any person who is fully in Krishna consciousness or devotional service of the Lord has all the good qualities of the great sages, whereas a person who is not so transcendental situated has no good qualifications because he is sure to be taking refuge in his own mental concoctions. Consequently, it is rightly said herein that one has to give up all kinds of sense desire manufactured by mental concoction. Artificially, such sense desires cannot be stopped. But if one is engaged in Krishna consciousness, then automatically sense desires subside without extraneous efforts. Therefore, one has to engage himself in Krishna consciousness without hesitation. For this devotional service will instantly help one onto the platform of transcendental consciousness. The highly developed soul always remains satisfied in himself by realizing himself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord. Such a transcendentally situated person has no sense desires resulting from petty materialism. Rather, he remains always happy in his natural position of eternally serving the Supreme Lord. We will go to the next verse. That is your chapter number 2, verse number 56. So this is also very important sloka. We'll try to remember the sloka. Translation. One who is not disturbed in mind even amidst the threefold miseries or elated when there is happiness, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind. Purport. The word Muni means one who can agitate his mind in various ways for mental speculation without coming to a factual conclusion. It is said that every Muni has a different angle of vision, and unless a Muni differs from other Munis, he cannot be called a Muni in the strict sense of the term. Nasha Rishi Jasya Matam Na Vinnam. Mahabharat Banaparba 313.117. But a Sitadir Muni, as mentioned herein by the Lord, is different from an ordinary Muni. The Sthitadir Muni is always in Krishna consciousness, for he has exhausted all his business of creative speculation. He is called Prashanta Nishesha Mano Rathantra, Stotra Ratna 43, or one who has surpassed the stage of mental speculations and has come to the conclusion that Lord Sri Krishna or Basudev is everything. Vasudeva Sarvam iti sa Mahatma sa Dullava. He is called a Muni, fixed in mind. Such a fully Krishna conscious person is not at all disturbed by the onslaughts of the threefold miseries, for he accepts all miseries as the mercy of the Lord, thinking himself one only worthy of more trouble due to his past misdeeds, and he sees that his miseries by the grace of the Lord are minimized to the lowest. Similarly, when he is happy, he gives credit to the Lord, thinking himself unworthy of the happiness. He realizes that it is due only to the Lord's grace that he is in such a comfortable condition and able to render better service to the Lord. And for the service of the Lord, he is always daring and active and is not influenced by attachment or aversion. Attachment means accepting things for one's own sense gratification, and detachment is the absence of such sensual attachment. But one fixed in Krishna consciousness has neither attachment nor detachment because his life is dedicated in the service of the Lord. Consequently, he is not at all angry, even when his attempts are unsuccessful. Success or no success, a Krishna conscious person is always steady in his determination. We will go to the next verse, that is of chapter number 2, verse number 57. Translation. In the material world, one who is unaffected by whatever good or evil he may obtain, neither praising it nor despising it, is firmly fixed in perfect knowledge. Purport. There is always some upheaval in the material world, which may be good or evil. One who is not agitated by such material upheavals, who is unaffected by good and evil, is to be understood to be fixed in Krishna consciousness. As long as one is in the material world, there is always the possibility of good and evil, because this world is full of duality. But one who is fixed in Krishna consciousness is not affected by good and evil, because he is simply concerned with Krishna, who is all good absolute. Such consciousness in Krishna situates one in a perfect transcendental position called technically samadhi. So here definition of samadhi is again explained. So now we will go to the next verse, chapter number 2, verse number 58. Translation. One who is able to withdraw his senses from sense objects as a tortoise draws its limbs within the cell is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. Purport. The test of a yogi, devotee, or self-realized soul is that he is able to control his senses according to his plan. Most people, however, are servants of the senses and are thus directed by the dictation of the senses. That is the answer to the question as to how the yogi is situated. The senses are compared to venomous serpents They want to act very loosely and without restriction. The yogi or the devotee must be very strong to control the serpents, like a snake charmer. He never allows them to act independently. There are many injunctions in the revealed scriptures. Some of them are don'ts, and some of them are do's. Unless one is able to follow the do's and the don'ts, restricting oneself from sense enjoyment, it is not possible to be firmly fixed in Krishna consciousness. The best example set herein is the tortoise. The tortoise can at any moment wind off its senses and exhibit them again at any time for particular purposes. Similarly, the senses of the Krishna conscious persons are used only for some particular purpose in the service of the Lord and are withdrawn otherwise. Arjuna is being taught here to use his senses for the service of the Lord instead of for his own satisfaction. Keeping the senses always in the service of the Lord is the example set by the analogy of the tortoise who keeps the senses within. So now we will move to the next verse. That is your chapter number 2, verse number 59. Translation. Though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But seizing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. Purport. Unless one is transcendentally situated, it is not possible to cease from sense enjoyment. The process of restriction from sense enjoyment by rules and regulations is something like restricting a diseased person from certain types of eatables. The patient, however, neither likes such restriction nor loses his tastes for eatables. Similarly, the sense gratification restriction by some spiritual processes like Ashtanga Yoga in the matter of Yam, Niyam, Asan, Pranayam, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, etc., is recommended for less intelligent persons who have no better knowledge. But one who has tested the beauty of the Supreme Lord Krishna in the course of his advancement in Krishna consciousness no longer has the taste for dead material things. Therefore, restrictions are there for the less intelligent neophytes in the spiritual advancement of life. But such restrictions are only good until one actually has a taste for Krishna consciousness. When one is actually Krishna conscious, he automatically loses his taste for pale things. Now we will move to the next verse. That is your chapter number 2, verse number 60. Translation. The senses are so strong and impetuous, O Arjuna, that they forcibly carry away the mind, even of a man of a discrimination who is endeavoring to control them. Purport. There are many learned sages, philosophers, and transcendentalists who try to conquer the senses, but in spite of their endeavors, even the greatest of them sometimes fall victim to material sense enjoyment due to the agitated mind. Even Vishwamitra, a great sage and perfect yogi, was misled by Menaka into sex enjoyment. Although the yogi was endeavoring for sense control with severe types of penance and yoga practice, and of course, there are so many similar instances in the history of the world. Therefore, it is very difficult to control the mind and senses without being fully Krishna conscious. Without engaging the mind in Krishna, one cannot see such material engagements. A practical example is given by Sri Yamunacharya, a great saint and devotee, who says, Yad avadi mama cheta Krishna padara vinde, Navanava rasa dhamani udyatam rantam ashit, tad avadi batanari sangamis smaran mani, bhavati mukha vikara sustu nisthipam cha. Since my mind has been engaged in the service of the lotus feet of the Lord Krishna, and I have been enjoying an ever new transcendental humor, Whenever I think of sex life of with a woman, my face at once turns from him and I spit at the thought. Krishna consciousness is such a transcendently nice thing that automatically material enjoyment becomes distasteful. It, it is as if a hungry man had satisfied his hunger by a sufficient quantity of nutritious eatables. Maharaj Ambarish also conquered a great yogi, Durvasa Muni, simply because his mind was engaged in consciousness. Savai Manaha Krishna Padaravinder Bachansi Vaikuntha Gunanuvarne. We will go to the now next verse, chapter number 2, verse number 61. Translation: one who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and fixes his consciousness upon me is known as a man of steady intelligence. Purport: that the highest conception of yoga perfection is Krishna consciousness is clearly explained in this verse. And unless one is Krishna conscious, it is not at all possible to control the senses, as cited above. The great says Durvasa Muni picked a quarrel with Maharaj Ambaris, and Durvasa Muni unnecessarily became angry out of pride and therefore couldn't check his senses. On the other hand, the king, although not as powerful as Yogi, as a sage, but a devotee of the Lord, silently tolerated all the sages' injustices and thereby emerged victorious. The king was able to control his senses because of the following qualifications, as mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, verse number 9.4.18 to 20. King Ambaris fixed his mind on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, engaged his words in describing the abode of the Lord, his hands in cleansing the temple of the Lord, his ears in hearing the pastimes of the Lord, his eyes in seeing the form of the Lord, and body in touching the body of the devotee, his nostrils in smelling the flavor of the flowers offered to the lotus feet of the Lord, his tongue in tasting the tulsi leaves offered to him, his legs in traveling to the holy places where his temple is situated, his head in offering obeisances unto the Lord, and his desires in fulfilling the desires of the Lord. And all these qualifications made him fit to become a Matpara devotee of the Lord. The word Matpara is most significant in this connection. How one can become Matpara is described in the life of the Maharaj Ambarish. Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan, a great scholar and acharya in the line of the Matpara, remarks, Madbhakti Prabhavena Sarvendriya Vijaya Purvika Swatama Drishti Sulaveti Bhava. The senses can be completely controlled only by the strength of the devotional service to Krishna. Also, the example of fire is sometimes given. As a blazing fire burns everything within a room, Lord Vishnu, situated in the heart of the yogi, burns up all kinds of impurities. The Yoga Sutra also prescribes meditation on Vishnu and not meditation on the void. The so-called yogis who meditate on something other than the Vishnu form simply waste their time in a vain search after some phantasmagoria. We have to be Krishna conscious, devoted to the personality of Godhead. This is the aim of the real yoga. Now we will go to the next verse, that is chapter number 2, verse number 62. This is also a very important sloka. Translation: while contemplating the objects of the senses, the person develops attachments for them, and from such attachment, lust develops, and from lust, anger arises. Purport: one who is not Krishna conscious is subjected to material desires while contemplating the objects of the senses. The senses require real engagements, and if they are not engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, they will certainly seek engagement in the service of materialism. In the material world, everyone, including Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, to say nothing of other demigods in the heavenly planets, is subjected to the influence of sense objects. And the only method to get out of this puzzle of material existence is to become Krishna conscious. Lord Shiva was deep in meditation, but when Parvati hesitated him for sense pleasure, he agreed to the proposal, and as a result, Kartikeya was born. When Haridas Thakur was a young devotee of the Lord, he was similarly allured by the incarnation of Maya Devi. But Haridas easily passed the test because of his unalloyed devotion to Lord Krishna. As illustrated in the above mentioned verse of Sri Yamunacharya, the sincere devotee of the Lord shuns all material sense enjoyment due to his higher taste for spiritual enjoyment in the association of the Lord. That is the secret of success. One who is not, therefore, in Krishna consciousness, however powerful he may be in controlling senses by artificial repression, is sure ultimately to fail. For the slightest of thought of sense pleasure will agitate him to gratify his desires. Now we will go to the next verse, that is your chapter number 2, verse number 63. Translation: from anger, complete delusion arises, and from delusion, bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost. And when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool. Purport: Srila Rupa Goswami has given us this direction in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.2.258. Prapanchikatya buddhya hari sambandhi vastunaha mumukshividi parityago vairagyam falgu kathayate. By development of Krishna consciousness, one can know that everything has its use in the service of the Lord. Those who are without knowledge of Krishna consciousness artificially try to avoid material objects, and as a result, although they desire liberation from material bondage, they do not attain to the perfect stage of renunciation. Their so-called renunciation is called falgu, or less important. On the other hand, a person in Krishna consciousness knows how to use everything in the service of the Lord. Therefore, he doesn't become a victim of the material consciousness. For example, for an impersonalist, the Lord or the absolute being impersonal cannot eat, whereas an impersonalist tries to avoid good eatables. A devotee knows that Krishna is the supreme enjoyer and that he eats all that is offered to him in devotion. So, after offering good eatables to the Lord, the devotee takes the remnants called prasadam. Thus, everything becomes spiritualized, and there is no danger of a downfall. The devotee takes prasadam in Krishna consciousness, whereas the non-devotee rejects it as a material. The impersonalist, therefore, cannot enjoy life due to his artificial renunciation, and for this reason, a slight agitation of the mind pulls him down again into the pool of material existence. It is said that such a soul, even though rising up to the point of liberation, falls down again due to his not having support in devotional service. Now we will move to the next verse, that is chapter number 2, verse number 64. Translation: but a person free from all attachment and aversion and able to control his senses through regulative principles of freedom can obtain the complete mercy of the Lord. Purport: it is already explained that one may externally control the senses by some artificial process, but unless the senses are engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is every chance of a fall. Although the person in full Krishna consciousness may apparently be on the sensual plane, because of his being Krishna conscious, he has no attachment to the sensual activities. The Krishna conscious person is concerned only with the satisfaction of Krishna and nothing else. Therefore, he is transcendental to all attachment and detachment. If Krishna wants, the devotee can do anything which is ordinarily undesirable. And if Krishna doesn't want, he shall not do that which he would have ordinarily done for his own satisfaction. Therefore, to act or not to act is within his control because he acts only under the direction of Krishna. This consciousness is the causeless mercy of the Lord, which the devotee can achieve in spite of his being attached to the sensual platform. Now we will move to the next verse, that is chapter number 2, verse number 65. It is only translation. For one thus satisfied in Krishna consciousness, the threefold miseries of material existence exist no longer. In such satisfied consciousness, one's intelligence is soon well established. Now we will move to the next verse, chapter number 2, verse number 66. Translation. One who is not connected with the Supreme in Krishna consciousness can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind, without which there is no possibility of peace. And how can there be any happiness without peace? Purport. Unless one is in Krishna consciousness, there is no possibility of peace. So it is confirmed in the chapter number 5, verse number 29, 5.29, that when one understands that Krishna is the only enjoyer of all the good results of sacrifice and penance, that he is the proprietor of all universal manifestations, and that he is the real friend of all living entities, then only can one have real peace. Therefore, if one is not in Krishna consciousness, there cannot be a final goal for the mind. Disturbance is due to want of an ultimate goal. And when one is certain that Krishna is the enjoyer, proprietor, and friend of everyone and everything, then one can, with a steady mind, bring about peace. Therefore, one who is engaged without a relationship with Krishna is certainly always in distress and is without peace. However much he may make a show of peace and spiritual advancement in life. Krishna consciousness is a self-manifested peaceful condition which can be achieved only in relationship with Krishna. Now we will move to the next verse, that is chapter number 2, verse number 67. Translation. Is a strong wind sweeps away a boat on the water, even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. Purport. Unless all of the senses are engaged in the service of the Lord, even one of them engaged in sense gratification can deviate the devotee from the path of transcendental advancement. As mentioned in the life of Maharaj Ambarish, all of the senses must be engaged in Krishna consciousness. For that is the correct technique for controlling the mind. Now we will move to the next verse, that is chapter number 2, verse number 68. Translation. Therefore, O mighty arm, one whose senses are restrained from their objects is certainly of steady intelligence. Purport. One can curb the forces of sense gratification only by means of Krishna consciousness or engaging all the senses in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. As enemies are curbed by superior force, the senses can similarly be curbed not by any human endeavor, but only by keeping them engaged in the service of the Lord. One who has understood this, that only by Krishna consciousness is one really established in intelligence, and that one should practice this art under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master, is called a sadhaka or a suitable candidate for liberation. Now we will move to the next verse, that is your chapter number 2, verse number 69. Translation. What is night for all beings is the time of awakening for the self-control, and the time of awakening for all beings is night for the introspective sage. Purport. There are two classes of intelligent men. One is intelligent in material activities for sense gratification, and the other is introspective and awake to the cultivation of self-realization. Activities of the introspective sage or thoughtful man are night for persons materially absorbed. Materialistic persons remain asleep in such a night due to their ignorance of self-realization, though introspective sage remains alert in the night of the materialistic man. The sage feels transcendental pleasure in the gradual advancement of the spiritual culture, whereas the man in materialistic activities being asleep to self-realization dreams of varieties of sense pleasure, feeling sometimes happy and sometimes distressed in his sleeping condition. The introspective man is always indifferent to materialistic happiness and distress. He goes on with his self-realization activities undisturbed by material reactions. Now we will move to the next verse, that is yours, chapter number 2, sloka, verse number 70. Translation. A person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. Purport. Although the vast ocean is always filled with water, it is always, especially during the rainy season, being filled with much more water, but the ocean remains the same, steady. It is not agitated, nor does it cross beyond the limit of its brink. That is also true of a person fixed in Krishna consciousness. As long as one has the material body, the demands of the body for sense gratification will continue. The devotee, however, is not disturbed by such desires because of his fullness. A Krishna conscious man is not in need of anything because the Lord fulfills all his material necessities. Therefore, he is like the ocean, always full in himself. Desires may come to him like the waters of the rivers that flow into the ocean, but he is steady in his activities and he is not even slightly disturbed by the desires for sense gratification. That is the proof of a Krishna conscious man, one who has lost all inclinations for material sense gratifications, although the desires are present. Because he remains satisfied in the transcendental love and service of the Lord, he can remain steady like the ocean and therefore enjoy full peace. Others, however, who want to fulfill desires even up to the limit of liberation, what to speak of material success, never attain peace. The fruitive workers, the salvationists, and also the yogis who are after mystic powers are all unhappy because of unfulfilled desires. But the person in Krishna consciousness is happy in the service of the Lord and he has no desires to be fulfilled. In fact, he doesn't even desire liberation from the so called material bondage. The devotees of Krishna have no material desires and therefore they are in perfect peace. Now we will move to the next verse, that is chapter number 2, verse number 71. Translation. A person who has given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, who has given up all sense of propriety of self and is devoid of false ego, he alone can attain real peace. Purport. To become desireless means not to desire anything for sense gratification. In other words, desire for becoming Krishna conscious is actually desirelessness. So I repeat, in other words, desire for becoming Krishna conscious is actually desirelessness. To understand one's actual position as the eternal servitor of Krishna without falsely claiming this material body to be oneself and without falsely claiming propriety of self over anything in the world is the perfect stage of Krishna consciousness. One who is situated in this perfect stage knows that because Krishna is the proprietor of everything, everything must be used for the satisfaction of Krishna. Arjuna didn't want to fight for his own sense satisfaction, but when he became fully Krishna conscious, he fought because Krishna wanted him to fight. For himself, there was no desire to fight, But for Krishna, the same Arjuna fought to his best ability. Real, real desirelessness is desire for the satisfaction for Krishna, not an artificial attempt to abolish desires. The living entity cannot be desireless or senseless, but he does have to change the quality of the desires. So this is a very important statement here. The living entity cannot be desireless or senseless, but he does have to change the quality of the desires. A materially desireless person certainly knows that everything belongs to Krishna. Ishabhashyam idam sarvam. And therefore, he doesn't falsely claim propriety of self over anything. This transcendental knowledge is based on self realization, namely, knowing perfectly well that every living entity is an eternal part and parcel of Krishna in spiritual identity, and that the eternal position of the living entity is therefore never on the level of Krishna or greater than him. This understanding of Krishna consciousness is the basic principle of real peace. Now we will move to the next verse, that is the last verse of this chapter, chapter number 2, verse number 2.72. Translation: that is the way of the spiritual and godly life, after attaining which a man is not bewildered. If one is thus situated, even at the hour of death, one can enter into the kingdom of God. Purport: one can attain Krishna consciousness or divine life at once within a second, or one may not attain such a state of life even after millions of wars. It is only a matter of understanding and accepting the fact. The fact Khatvanga Maharaj attained the state of life just a few minutes before his death by surrendering unto Krishna. Nirvana means ending the process of materialistic life. According to Buddhist philosophy, there's only void after the completion of this material life. But Bhagavad Gita teaches differently. Actual life begins after the completion of this material life. For the gross materialist, it is sufficient to know that one has to end this materialistic way of life. But for persons who are spiritually advanced, there is another life after this materialistic life. Before ending this life, if one fortunately becomes Krishna conscious, he at once attains the stage of Brahma Nirvana. There's no difference between the kingdom of God and the devotional service of the Lord. Since both of them are on the absolute plane, to be engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord is to have attained the spiritual kingdom. In the material world, there are activities of sense gratification, whereas in the spiritual world, there are activities of Krishna consciousness. Attainment of Krishna consciousness, even during this life, is immediate attainment of Brahman. And one who is situated in Krishna consciousness has certainly already entered into the kingdom of God. Brahman is just the opposite of matter. Therefore, Brahmi Sthiti means not on the platform of material activities. Devotional service of the Lord is accepted in the Bhagavad Gita as a liberated stage. Sagunan Samastitan Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. Therefore, Brahmi Sthiti is liberation from material bondage. Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur has summarized this second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita as being the contents for the whole text. In the Bhagavad Gita, the subject matters are Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. In the second chapter, Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga have been clearly discussed, and a glimpse of Bhakti Yoga has also been given as the contents for the complete text. Thus, and the Bhakti Vedanta purports the second chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of its contents. So this ends our chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita. Now we will try to summarize the last section of this section, that is the verse number 54 to verse number 72. So as we discussed, here we discussed about the Sthita Prajna. Like after hearing Krishna's descriptions of Buddhi Yoga, Arjuna asks basically how to recognize a transcendentalist or the Sthita Prajna question. So Krishna describes again how a transcendentalist gives up all the material desires, who is equipoised and detached, yet he still continues to act according to the prescribed duties. Krishna here advises Arjuna to also to control his senses by following regulative principles. By doing so, he will attain the mercy of the Lord and be happy. So this second chapter is a summary of the entire Bhagavad Gita. So it's one of the most important chapter. In this chapter, Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga have been clearly discussed, and a glimpse of Bhakti Yoga has also been given. So we'll stop here. And for reciting the sloka here in this mind map, if you see, I have given a link. So there is a link in this where exactly if you try to learn, memorize sloka, or if you like to, if you are new to Sanskrit and if you can't pronounce, you can follow this YouTube link. And in this link, you will be finding very nice sloka recitation. So basically,